We'll start with the special counsel investigating President Biden for his handling of classified documents will not bring charges against the president. That's the conclusion. Robert Hur wrote in his report released yesterday, quote, our investigation uncovered evidence that President Biden willfully retained and disclosed classified materials after his vice presidency when he was a private citizen. He goes on to write that the president's actions, quote, present serious risks to national security. But then later in the report, Hur conceded that the evidence, quote, does not establish Mr. Biden's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The special counsel wrote that the president could also portray himself at trial as an elderly man with a poor memory who would be sympathetic to a jury. Hur's description...
A neurologist and a lawyer.
Let me just finish, but I agree.
Well, no, but we kind of need to stop there. A neurologist...
You're talking about Hur.
Hur, from Trump University.
No.
And... I've got to stop right here. I know we want to go on and finish this report, but I've just got to start. Ken Dilanian, so bizarre, and there's so many people that immediately heard these random conclusions, irrelevant conclusions, politically charged, Trump-like ramblings. Who, first of all, wondered why in the world he would put that in a report, his neurological assessment of Joe Biden, and secondly, why Merrick Garland would release garbage like that in the Justice Department report. Can you give us any insight? Because it sure sounds like James Comey in 2016, who July couldn't indict Hillary Clinton legally, so he decided to hold a press conference and indict her politically.
Joe, I understand where you're coming from on that. I think a lot of people feel that way, but let me give you the explanation that I have heard from Justice Department officials and some insight into why that was in there, though it did seem gratuitous to a lot of people. If Rob Hur is saying, I have evidence that Joe Biden willfully retained classified information, then in fact, he didn't just find those documents in 2022, as we all thought. He actually found them in 2017, and he's recorded saying that to his ghostwriter. So why isn't he charging him? Well, he has to explain that. So the explanation is Joe Biden said he didn't remember. He was recorded saying, I found classified documents in my house in Virginia, to the ghostwriter. He's recorded disclosing classified information to the ghostwriter, according to this report. But he says he forgot that. So Rob Hur has to explain that, in fact, the larger context here is that Mr. Biden has forgotten a lot of things. He forgot the dates that he was vice president, according to this report. He forgot at one point during the interview when his son died. He forgot a key figure in the Afghanistan debate that he cared a lot about, which side of the debate he was on. And so Rob Hur felt like he had no choice, I'm told, but to lay out in detail the faults he found with Joe Biden's memory and explain how that would be perceived in front of a jury, because he's going to have to go up to Congress and justify to a bunch of angry Republicans why Donald Trump is being charged with retaining classified documents, but Joe Biden isn't. So that's the explanation. A lot of people may not like it. Maybe people thought he went too far. And you know, I've obviously heard from people who speak for Mr. Biden who say, you know, look, how did Rob Hur evaluate his memory in a 5-hour interview? I've been with him, you know, for years, and I think his memory is a lot better than that. That's a fair point, I think. You know, Rob Hur is ultimately going to have to go to Congress, and he's going to have to answer for this, but that's the explanation.
Well, I mean, it's so gratuitous. And John Heilemann, something else that jumped out is, again, the word willfully, that he willfully retained the documents. Then you go a couple of hundred pages in, and it goes, well, it's natural to assume that Mr. Biden put the Afghanistan documents in the box on purpose and knew they were there. Quote, there is, in fact, a shortage of evidence on these points. So 200 pages early, he goes, he willfully. And then 200 pages later, say, well, we actually don't have evidence on that point. And he did that a couple of times throughout here. It certainly seemed like a politically charged document. It, you know, used to be pre-James Comey, you would either indict somebody or you wouldn't indict somebody. But now in the political sphere, again, James Comey can't indict Hillary Clinton during a presidential election legally. So what does he do? He holds a press conference and indicts her politically. Same thing happened yesterday. He didn't have any evidence. There's so many, and we're going to go through these. It is the one thing that he did right. He talked about the distinctions between Donald Trump, who lied, stole, lied, hid, obstructed, lied again, had his lawyers lie under oath, continued to lie, continued to hide, continued to obstruct, told his employees to lie, on and on and on. Joe Biden turned it over immediately. Of course, I don't expect liars on other news channels or liars in other parties to actually tell the truth. I don't expect them to do that. But there are those clear distinctions. But even here, though, John Heilemann, you have a situation where he says time and time again, we don't really have any evidence that he willfully took and retained this evidence.
Right. Well, first, Joe, I'll say that literally before we started the program, I was saying to Chuck Rosenberg sitting here, can you explain to me how this is different from what Jim Comey did in what we think of as in 2016 as Comey won his first intercession in the election. In that case, you were referring to in July, I think of 2016 when he did what you just said. And I like you, am old enough to remember when prosecutors either charged someone and issued a charging document, or they issued a declension, and the declension was one sentence, which says we decline to prosecute. Chuck, I think, is going to talk about something that I don't know as much about the detail of it, is how the difference between back in those days when we had the independent counsel statute and what we have now, where we have special counsels and what the regulations are and what they have to do. I will say that that there's no doubt in my mind that that this special prosecutor could have written the same report without using these words: elderly man with a poor memory. I'm like you, I'm a simple country journalist. I can find a lot of different ways to say this.
Yeah, you know what?
Without
I'm a
saying
simple country lawyer.
Yeah.
John, I'm a simple country lawyer, and I know. What's the headline? What should the headline from this report be? Not indicted.
Not guilty. Right.
Not the evidence to indict him. Yeah. It's not there. And the clear differences, as he wrote, between Trump and Biden. That should be.
And I would have thought, Joe.
Wait, hold on, John. Hold on, John. Do you think that this guy is so naive? Do you think this guy is so stupid? Do you guys think this guy is so clueless that he didn't know, by putting words in that Donald Trump would love for him to put in there, that wasn't going to be the headline for the New York Post, that wouldn't be on every... The guy knew. He's a Trumper who knew.
Right.
So why in the world would the Justice Department allow that dicta to be in there? It's gratuitous. Well, and he knows it's gratuitous, and it was bad faith. It was bad faith that he did it, and it was even worse judgment that the Justice Department allowed that garbage to be released. Right now, Democratic member and judge saying he's guilty of rape. Let's bring a Democratic member of the House Oversight Committee, Congressman Dan Goldman of New York. Congressman, this seems an awful lot like 2016 and James Comey saying, well, geez, I can't indict Hillary Clinton legally, so I'm going to indict her politically and hold a press conference and attack her. This language that he used, this gratuitous language that he used, again, given the sensitivities of the case, he knew it was going to end up on the front page of pro-Trump newspapers. He knew it, and it's exactly what happened. What's your reaction?
Well, my reaction is there are a number of highly questionable and seemingly partisan and political assessments by the special counsel. First of all, the evidence that President Biden knew he had classified materials while he was a private citizen, and that's important because otherwise he was perfectly legal. It was perfectly legal for him to have it, was so thin And for him to even conclude that he willfully retained, I think, is a flawed conclusion. The evidence does not support that. So that's right off the bat that you have this questionable conclusion. And then he goes on to do a full analysis. And while I agree with Chuck that the credibility of witnesses matters, the credibility of the potential defendant is something altogether very different, especially when one volunteers for an interview, because he's not going to testify. A jury is not going to end up having to analyze Joe Biden, and especially when you're saying that the charges or the evidence does not meet the charges, that is completely gratuitous and completely unnecessary. My understanding as well, Joe, is that during these 5 hours, President Biden went through in great detail many conversations that he had with various other people from years and years ago. So he cherry-picked a couple of examples that perhaps we don't know, perhaps are in context, perhaps are out of context, related to very sensitive issues such as his son, really just to bash him, just to impugn him. And it is excessive. It is gratuitous. And the last thing I'll say, Joe, is it's wrong. I have had a number of conversations with President Biden over the last couple years, including on October 7th, the day before this interview when I was in Israel, and he called me. And his mastery and understanding of the geopolitical situation on the ground in Israel and in the surrounding region was remarkable. He was recounting to me all the various different things they had done in the first couple hours of the war. He was completely on top of everything that was going on, and his experience, because of his age and his wisdom, has been invaluable to this country as we have navigated through the Russia-Ukraine war and now the Middle East. So there is a flip side to the age thing, which Joe Biden has demonstrated very well over the last couple of years.
Congressman, good morning. As we just laid out for the last 20 minutes or so, the headline is clear out of this report, which is that no charges are warranted, and also the distinctions between what President Biden did and what former President Donald Trump did in terms of obstructing justice, sitting voluntarily for an interview, and all of those things. Like it or not, all that stuff from the special counsel about the age now is out in the public view, even some Democrats cringing a little because it raises an issue that's been out there. Do you have any concerns at all, not just because of what we read in this report, which a lot of people on this show don't think should have been in the report, but do you have concerns right now about President Biden's age as it moves toward the general election?
No, I don't have any concerns, and that's from personal interactions. He's got a terrific team around him. He is very knowledgeable and experienced, and he has even recently completely dominated the Republicans. You look at the Fiscal Responsibility Act. He did a fabulous job, and my understanding is that he was behind the scenes, and because of his experience negotiating over so many different years, he knew exactly where the negotiation was going to go, and he took Kevin McCarthy's shirt. I think President Biden is incredibly experienced, knowledgeable, wise, and I don't have concerns about his age. Remember, the job of the president is to guide our country. It is, not to be a cheerleader for the United States. It is to govern our country. And I think when you see the juxtaposition of how he handled this case, fully cooperating, respecting the rule of law, respecting the independence of the Department of Justice, and you juxtapose that with Donald Trump, what you see is someone who really cares about our country and cares about our democracy, juxtaposed and opposite to a criminal, to someone who is clearly out for himself, does not believe the law applies to him, and is a danger to this country. And that's the choice that the American people are going to have.
All right. Democratic member of the House Oversight and Homeland Security Committees, Congressman Dan Goldman, thank you for being with us this morning.
We deserve leaders who stand for principle, who unite us all behind shared values, who cast aside anger for love. That is the standard we should expect from everybody. If you love our country, and love your children as much as I know that you do. Stand and speak and vote your conscience. Vote for candidates up and down the ticket who you trust to defend our freedom and to be faithful to the Constitution.
That was Texas Senator Ted Cruz back in 2016. Remember him? When he was booed for refusing to endorse Donald Trump as the party's presidential nominee. Instead, famously telling Americans to vote their conscience. Fast forward 8 years later, and Cruz has fallen in line, along with the vast majority of the Republican Party behind Trump, endorsing him to be the party's presidential nominee for a third cycle in a row. Joining us now, staff writer at The Atlantic, Mark Leibovich. His latest piece is entitled "The Validation Brigade Salutes Trump." And in it, Mark, you write, quote, "The GOP once prided itself on being an alliance of free-thinking frontiersmen who embraced rugged individualism, a term popularized by Republican President Herbert Hoover. This is no longer that time. Full acquiescence to Trump is now the most essential Republican ethic, such as it is, or at least the chief prerequisite to viability in the party. This near total submission to the former boss has persisted no matter how egregious his actions are or how plainly he states his authoritarian goals. Yet the Republican Party now appears to have entered a new level of capitulation to Trump, a kind of ho-hum acceptance phase where full support has become almost mundane, just like a grocery line. There's a certain power in bland and seemingly harmless gestures from people who know better. Permission structures strengthen over time. Complicity calcifies in obscurity. And, go ahead. No, you're going to do the list.
I was just saying, it used to be that Republicans in the early days would have to justify mean tweets. If you listen to what a certain senator said from Utah, Mike Lee. But now he's classifying as, quote, mean tweets, rape. Donald Trump raping a woman, according to a judge.
Defaming her. Saying nasty things about a lot of women.
Well, and also saying nasty things about generals he's going to execute. Talking about being a dictator on day one. Talking about terminating the Constitution. Talking about using SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political opponent being okay for him. And of course, talking about banning news outlets. We can go down the list. The bar keeps getting higher and Republicans keep jumping. Mark Leibovich, what say you?
Oh, Joe. Hi, guys. Basically, I wanted to...
Good morning, Mark.
Good morning.
What did you want to do? Did you want to talk about the Beatles? Is that why you're here?
Well, I mean,
an elderly man with this.
He's a kind elderly man,
short memory,
very short memory, and thought he was here to talk about the 60th anniversary of the Beatles on Ed Sullivan.
Can you imagine how big the Beatles would have been if, one of them were dating Travis Kelce's sister or something like that? Anyway, so my piece. It's sort of taking it back to Ted Cruz. What I wanted to do was to juxtapose really what was, quite a spirited, relatively speaking, internal fight in the Republican Party about what Trumpism certainly was looking like then, or what people had their worst visions of Trumpism, and what it's become now. And what I wanted to look at was, frankly, the very mundane and banal, kind of adding to the list that the likes of John Cornyn, John Barrasso, Shelley Moore Capito, Marco Rubio, Cruz, Tom Emmer, just your standard garden variety, quote unquote, prominent Republicans who in the last few weeks have just sort of, almost as a matter of rote, just sort of put little releases out saying, I stand with Donald Trump. And, you can ignore everything they said about him after January 6th, everything that they've said about him in the last however many years. This is just what they do now. And what I think it's really emblematic of when you look at, what Cruz said 8 years ago, and I remember being in the hall that night, and it was one of the most riveting things I've ever seen in politics, because it was even then quite rare to see someone stand up as fulsomely. But really, it's just so mundane now. I mean, Ted Cruz put his name on a list. Everyone else just sort of went along, and that's kind of the nature of complicity in general. You lose your fight over time. You become totally numb to it, and this is what the Republican Party is.
And Mark, then there are the people who have taken it a step further, those particularly who want to be Donald Trump's vice presidential running mate, perhaps. Elise Stefanik, the congresswoman from New York, was on CNN last night where she said she would not have done what Mike Pence did on January 6th, meaning she would not have certified the election. She went on to say, just repeating the lies about the 2020 election. This is a prominent member of Congress who could potentially be vice president of the United States. So setting themselves up now that if Donald Trump loses, if Donald Trump doesn't like the results he gets when he becomes president, that you have a group of people who will go along with whatever he says, that there will be no guardrails, a group of people who will perhaps violate the Constitution in the service of Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, you can focus. I mean, the Elise Stefaniks of the world, the Vivek Ramaswamis of the world. I mean, these are very flamboyant sycophants at this point. I mean, they're really kind of, in a very undignified way, I would say, kind of competing for his affection, you know, maybe to be his running mate or some high-level position in the administration. Clearly, you know, if he is elected, he is going to have a level of even greater authority, certainly in the party, and it's not like a Senate or Congress, you know, made up of his party, you know, whether they're the majority or not, is going to not sanction that. So he's going to have these sycophants around him. But again, I wanted to focus on the people who know better, the quote-unquote serious Republicans, the people who have said as much in the past, who certainly have said this privately and continue to say it privately, who continue to go along. And that's really where the strength of his power in, just how he's just sort of led an entire party of people who know better to bend their collective knee.
Michael, I'll start with you. Obviously, the big news should be, well, there should be a couple of big headlines from last night. The first one should be that Joe Biden cleared of any wrongdoing. And the second one should be that Biden announced last night that it was his belief that Israel was overstepping the boundaries of what they should be doing in Gaza. Two massive stories. Nobody's talking about it this morning. I'm sure on certain channels, because the special counsel decided to add some verbiage that had nothing to do with, well, Joe Biden's innocence.
No, absolutely, Joe. The word of the day is obviously gratuitous. The other word is unfortunate. I think that, you know, as you guys just discussed in the last hour, you know, there are lines that are clearly drawn for the special counsel in his reporting back to the attorney general. What I find completely stunning for the second time, our Justice Department has allowed a report by a special counsel, a special prosecutor, to weigh in a political space, to upset that particular balance, if you will, by allowing personal opinion to be a part of an official report. And not only personal opinion, but unnecessary personal opinion, the kind of opinion you don't give a damn about, because it's your casual observation, which has nothing to do with the investigation into the allegations and the facts that were before the special prosecutor. So there was that piece of this, and so there's got to be some internal, I don't know how they get at it, but they've got to do some internal work to clean that mess up. The fact that Merrick Garland allowed that report to go out the way he did. And it's not like he doesn't have control over it. It's not like they can dial back, certainly pull out the really, gratuitous personal observations. The second piece, which is actually, I think, a more important story, was the clear line that this president is seemingly now prepared to draw with Netanyahu to move the events in the Middle East, specifically Israel, to a different place than Netanyahu currently wants them to be. And I think that that's going to be something that's going to be very, very important over the next couple of days to a few weeks, to get the reaction out of Israel, but more importantly, to see how the administration backs those words up. I don't think it was a one-off by the president to sort of change the conversation. I think on a number of occasions recently, Joe, the president has found a voice that he wants to inject into this debate about whether they move in one direction or they stay where they are with Israel. And I think it's high time the president does exactly that.
Yeah, it was an extraordinary moment last night at the White House. The press conference called to address the special counsel report about classified documents. As President Biden was leaving, some questions were shouted at him about Gaza. He returned to the podium to say Israel has gone too far. We're going to talk more about that in a moment, Gene, but do want to get your take on the special counsel's report. We should underline the very first line of the report. In the executive summary, before he even gets into detail, the special counsel reads, "We conclude no criminal charges are warranted in this matter." Full stop. And then he goes on, Gene, to itemize all the ways in which what Joe Biden did, how he handled the classified documents, how he handled the investigation were completely the polar opposite of what Donald Trump did. And yet, a lot of the conversation is about the extra thoughts, the musings that this special counsel had about the mental acuity and the age of President Biden.
Yeah, that stuff was totally inappropriate. You're right. The headline from the report is that there are no charges because no charges are warranted. But Robert Hur knew exactly what he was doing. He has to have known exactly what he was doing. And it reads as if, grudgingly, he decided that, there is absolutely no basis for any sort of prosecution. So he was going to throw in this dig at Biden, and he threw it in. And so he presents this to Merrick Garland. And so the question is, what does Merrick Garland then do? He had the authority, certainly, to edit the report before it was released to the public. But I am pretty confident that had he edited out the gratuitous references to Biden's or his observations of Biden and his acuity, had he edited that out, it would have leaked. It would have leaked, and the story then would have been that Merrick Garland, edited out all this damaging stuff about Joe Biden and is covering it up. And so I think he was kind of damned if he did, damned if he didn't in that situation. Special prosecutors are, we give them a lot of license, and this special prosecutor abused that license in a most explicitly political way.
Well, and again, Adrian, he knew exactly what was going to happen, just like James Comey knew exactly what was going to happen in July of 2016 when he held that press conference, just like James Comey knew exactly what was going to happen 10 days before when he wrote a letter where there were 1,000 different ways he could have written that letter to not actually impact the outcome of the election and let voters just decide instead of putting it in suspended animation. But I would guess, Adrian, there are a lot of Democrats, a lot of Democratic workers, a lot of Democratic voters, a lot of Democratic volunteers that had to be thinking yesterday, my God, this just never stops. We're forever going to have special prosecutors who can't indict a Democratic candidate, so they're going to try to politically damage them. And that's exactly what Hur was trying to do yesterday.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Joe. I mean, my phone was blowing up last night from, former Clinton colleagues. This reminded us so much of what we witnessed James Comey do on July 5th of 2016, which is to take the unprecedented step at the time of using a report like this to essentially share his own public opinion to, the American people. He spent, of course, 15 minutes just ridiculing Hillary Clinton, completely slamming her and then saying, oh, by the way, we don't recommend that the DOJ go forward with charges. And this is its own modern day version. What Hur did yesterday, this is his own modern day version of that same type of situation. So it certainly makes my blood boil. I mean, we got to remember this is a MAGA appointed, former Trump appointed U.S. attorney from Maryland who did this. And he knew exactly what he was doing, Joe. You're exactly right. It's almost like he's giving a wink, wink, nod, nod to Donald Trump, saying, you know what, I'm not going to recommend or that we go forward with any kind of charges, but I am going to try to, publicly tear down President Biden in a very gratuitous, incorrect way to score some political points, maybe with Donald Trump in the future. But here's the bottom line, Joe. Not that we need to sit here and defend President Biden because he's perfectly capable, he's perfectly competent. But you don't put 14.2 million jobs on the card, which he's done as president, if you don't have the strong mental acuity to do it. You don't pass 4 major economic bills, 2 of those bipartisan. You don't put the first black woman on the Supreme Court. The list goes on in terms of President Biden's accomplishments. You don't manage a complex situation in the Middle East if you don't have your strong mental acuity. So completely, inexcusable by Hurd. And I think this does, unfortunately, continue a precedent that James Comey started back in 2016. But again, I mean, we're not worried about President Biden's competency or mental acuity, but it's very unfortunate what happened yesterday.
A detailed new piece in the New York Times Magazine charts the career path of former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and how he became, quote, the least trusted man in Washington. Contributing writer Robert Draper spoke with real estate agents who worked with Meadows before he turned to politics and with some of his colleagues after Meadows switched to politics. Draper says, quote, the recurrent feature of Meadows' career ascent is that he persuaded people to trust him, leaving them later to regret having done so. And Robert Draper joins us now. This is so interesting. I saw that happen. I'm not going to say Elijah Cummings regretted befriending Mark Meadows because he had love in his heart for everybody. But I saw him in real time. Just, I don't know if I can think of a less crass way of putting it, but he just turns on people to his own necessity, crying and claiming he's not a racist and using Elijah in ways that I thought was so inappropriate. And yet he ascended to the highest office of the land working alongside the president. What's the deal with this guy?
Yeah, it's straight out of a Flannery O'Connor short story, basically, Mika. This is a guy who came out of Tampa, Florida, in his mid-20s, showed up to this little resort town of Highlands, North Carolina, with his wife. He'd been a customer service salesman for the Tampa Electric Company, opened up a sandwich shop in Highlands, and then just kind of year after year began conning people and moving his way up. In doing so, he began with this sweet little old Christian lady who helped him get a job, helped him with money, and then ultimately moved on and up, and leaving her feeling very embittered. And that behavior became all the way, continued until he became a member of Congress, where he showed this propensity for telling people things they wanted to hear, not because he was a chronic people pleaser, but for reasons of self-advancement. And it worked. For a decade, in a decade's time in Washington, he rose from being this obscure first-term congressman to being the White House Chief of Staff and the very last Chief of Staff for Donald Trump. So but it's a story of duplicity and a story of an artful dodger who's now found himself in a box, which is the box of being under indictment in Fulton County and perhaps having to testify in the federal January 6th trial.
Well, Robert, good morning. You led me to my question, which is, look where it's gotten him, trying to please everybody at once. And now he finds himself in some trouble and finds himself as one of the primary sources of evidence against Donald Trump in some of these cases. He turned off, though he wouldn't testify, he turned over tons of texts and emails to the January 6th committee. So what is your sense? I know he wouldn't talk to you for this piece, but your sense of where he is now, how he's doing now?
Yeah, well, how he's doing is he's well off. He has a job paying him roughly $850,000 a year at this MAGA sort of think tank called the Conservative Partnership Institute. It's unclear what he does for all that money, but he has a $1.6 million lake house in South Carolina. But in a broader sense, Willie, I mean, he's in deep trouble. I mean, he's he received an immunity order to testify before the federal grand jury, and it seems pretty evident to me that the game that Meadows is playing here is that he wants to stay out of trouble. He doesn't want to be prosecuted by Jack Smith's team, but at the same time, he doesn't want to take the witness stand. So essentially, he's provided a kind of roadmap during 6 hours of testimony that he gave to the grand jury on March the 23rd of last year. But my suspicion is that Smith's team is going to want him on the witness stand because he was the man in the room next to Donald Trump when Trump apparently knew that he had lost the election but proceeded to try to overturn it anyway. Of course, if Smith's team puts Meadows on the witness stand, then they're putting a habitual liar on the witness stand, which means he could be eviscerated on cross-examination. So the problem that Donald Trump has and the problem Mark Meadows has is Jack Smith's problem now, too.
Hey, Robert, it's Heilman here. You know, one of among the many virtues of your work, you have deep reporting, wonderful writing, and also historical perspective. You've been around the block a few times. So I take note when I read that you said that you having seen Meadows' charm offensive in the past, that you were struck by how deeply he's loathed by many people who once admired him. Now, for something to strike you, given that there are a lot of loathsome people in Washington, right? I'm curious, where does he rank on the scale of loathsomeness in your experience in terms of the others, people who this happens in Washington sometimes. People betray their trusts and they come to be loathed by those who once loved them. Like that, where is he in the pantheon of greatly once loved and now loathed political figures you've covered?
In a class of his own is the answer, John. I mean, he's, you know, I really, in over 30 years of reporting on politics, have never encountered someone who was so frequently admired and then after that loathed. And I have to say that a lot of these people feel that way because they felt lied to by him. They felt swindled by him. And many of these people, I should add, are like himself, conservative Christians who took him at his word, who saw him as cut from the same religious cloth, as it were, that they are, and then found that he was a shyster, and so many of them remained so embittered by Meadows that they just simply didn't want to talk to me, as if it was kind of an act of self-defilement to revisit those years. So yeah, I mean, he really is, and obviously to say anyone is the least trusted man in Washington, I mean, that's a distinction you have to work hard to earn, and let's just say that Mark Meadows is a hard-working man.
Yes, he is. He really works very hard. It's a good point. The new piece is online now for the New York Times Magazine. Contributing writer at New York Times Magazine, Robert Draper. Thank you very much for being on this morning. So also yesterday, the Senate voted on to open debate on a foreign aid bill yesterday, just one day after voting down the bipartisan national security package that included aid for Israel and Ukraine. 17 Republicans joined Democrats in voting for the bill in total. 13 Republicans who voted against the original package that included border security provisions they demanded, voted for an aid package President Biden asked for months ago. The Senate will now undergo 30 hours of debate on amendments, which the Senate Republican Conference says will be related to Ukraine and the border. Gene, in your new piece for the Washington Post, it's entitled "Move Aside Johnson and McConnell. Trump is now in charge." And actually, it's a great point. In the latest episode of Morning Mika, I call these Republicans munchkins, MAGA munchkins, because Donald Trump is the Wizard of Oz, and he's in charge, even though he's not president, over these people who there seems to be no bottom in terms of how they will demean themselves and this country and our process.
Yeah, I stopped looking for a bottom a long time ago. And so Donald Trump not only is the Wizard of Oz, but he is the Speaker of the House and the Senate Minority Leader. They respond to him. They don't respond to Mike Johnson, and they're not responding to Mitch McConnell, which is amazing. The way the border Ukraine package collapsed, of course, it was always going to have these problems in the House, but the way it collapsed in the Senate and the way that senators who support it, who in their hearts supported that deal and recognized it was a once-in-a-lifetime deal they were getting on immigration and that Ukraine desperately needs this money and it really should be passed. And because Donald Trump told them not to pass it, not to do it, they abandoned what they knew to be right, and they abandoned Mitch McConnell, which doesn't usually happen. He has been, as you know, one of the canniest operators in Washington for a long, long time. But he's not in control of his Senate Republican caucus right now. Donald Trump is. And so heaven help us all. How does Congress get anything done, including funding the government, because we're up against another deadline in March? How do they get anything done with Donald Trump calling the shots?
Yeah, Michael Steele, I mean, Trump's power is on full display. He killed those bills. We had Elise Stefanik openly auditioning to be his vice president in an interview last night, saying that she disagreed with what Mike Pence did, that if she had been VP in that moment, she wouldn't have certified Joe Biden's victory. And we see that the Trump is well on his way after a couple more caucus wins this week to securing the GOP nomination. So weigh in on that. And as a second part, do you think there's any scenario here where this foreign aid bill, which now there is some optimism might get through the Senate, but could it possibly get through the House of Representatives when we know that Mike Johnson is going to do what Donald Trump wants, and Donald Trump doesn't seem inclined to help Ukraine?
Yeah, there's nothing like slathering yourself all over Donald Trump. It's just like, at least really find some dignity. Seriously, just stop it. Just find some dignity for once, for God's sake. I mean, it's just, you get to a point, you just get sick and tired of hearing this crap from these people. If I were vice president, I would have violated my constitutional oath. Yeah, okay. So you won't be vice president. But the reality of it is, that's the problem inside this caucus, this body, this thing that Donald Trump has created in his own image. So yeah, you have them find these moments where the bright light come on and they go, yes, we need to do the right thing for the country. And Donald Trump says, no, we're not doing the right thing for the country. And they go, okay. And they slink back off into their corners and wait for the next instruction. So that's been the game. There does come a point, though, and I think with respect to the foreign aid bill, that this carve out will allow them at least to get this on the floor, because the harsh reality, Jonathan, is that you got to deal with what's happening in Ukraine right now. And irrespective of the MAGA heads that are all up Putin's behind, the reality of it is there's NATO alliances. There is the reality of bringing that war here, meaning our troops at some point having to go fight there. So how do you begin to sort of stem that particular tide? This foreign aid bill has to get addressed. And yeah, you can, you take it off the table with the border. But I think the reality there is more pressing at the moment, because you have Zelensky out there doing his thing. Zelensky's trying to get it done, so they got to back up there. The other part of this, though, is the House. And I think as crazy as it seems, there's going to be a lot of noise on this. But I think Hillary Clinton is right in her interview on MSNBC the other day that I think the House will come around on this. The votes will be there. It'll be close. But I think, again, the realities of Ukraine will push this thing forward in a way that it gets done.
Let's talk about Democrats' reaction to Joe Biden and the special counsel report yesterday and the press conference last night. What is the impact of yesterday on the Biden presidency?
Well, I think what I'm hearing is there is an acknowledgement that this special counsel went outside the lines. There was no need for him to bring in some of the things he put in the report. Frankly, trying to say that the reason a jury wouldn't convict him is because he's elderly and didn't mean to do it or whatever is silly. a jury wouldn't convict him because he cooperated and immediately wanted to give over the documents, wanted to give them everything, and never tried to mislead them, never tried to hide the documents, never did the stuff that the guy with the orange face down at the golf club did with the documents that he took. It was not, they weren't taken on purpose. I think Trump's were. That will remain to be seen if the evidence shows that. But clearly there were efforts to hide them afterwards. That wasn't the case with Biden. That's why a jury wouldn't convict him. It has nothing to do with how old he is or whether or not he has gaffes. So I think most Democrats are angry that this special counsel did what he did, which was clearly political.
Yeah, Walter Isaacson, your reaction to what you saw last night?
Well, I do think that the senator is correct, but what happened in that report is it played into a narrative that a lot of people worry about, which is that President Biden isn't as sharp, and it's hurting his candidacy, and you see more than 60% of the people saying he's too old. So that narrative, like all narratives, is overblown. It's filled with some things that people have crammed into it. But like all narratives, it has an odious smell of truth to it. So what I think Biden has to do is go out and confront the narrative. He has, if I were him, I'd call the CBS people and say, okay, I'm going to do that Super Bowl interview, and I'm going to do it live. And I'm going to go to the border, and I'm going to talk to people, and I'm going to do town hall meetings, and I'm just going to show how engaged I am. A lot of the criticisms are unfair, but if he's going to debunk this narrative, he's going to have to confront it.
Yeah, and certainly part of the White House pushback is these are people who speak in public. These things happen. In fact, just the other day, new Speaker Mike Johnson, who is decades younger than President Biden, well, he made a similar blunder. Take a look.
Well, let's make a couple of things clear here, Kristen. You know, we passed the support for Iran many months ago, 3 months ago. Immediately after I became Speaker, we sent the necessary resources there.
The speaker there confusing countries' names. It happens. I mean, I can never remember Mike Barnacle's name. Claire, this is, though, as noted, and we certainly a lot of pushback from the White House and Democrats last night, as you say, believing the special counsel went out of bounds. But this is a narrative that has been out there, and it predates this report. That their polling backs it up. There was a devastating NBC poll just a few days ago saying that the vast majority of Americans don't believe that President Biden is up to the job anymore. They think he is too old and not mentally fit. So what would your recommendations be? How do they change this narrative? We know Trump makes blunders too, but at least to this point, and maybe it's changing, the blunders don't stick to him as much. What do you think the President Biden's team can do?
Well, confusing Nancy Pelosi with Nikki Haley is pretty darn bad. They couldn't have two people further apart in terms of who they are and what they represent. So listen, I think this is going to be a binary choice. I think the country knows, and I hope, I'm more worried about the third party candidates, frankly, than I am anything else. But as long as it's a binary choice between what Donald Trump represents to this country and to women and to freedom and to our democracy versus Joe Biden, I'm comfortable with that. I agree with Walter that he's got to get out there, and he's got to get out there, and the staff has to be less worried about his gaffes and more worried about him showing his enthusiasm, his passion, his emotions. And I thought last night, on balance, you know, you could tell he was angry. You could tell that was real. It was authentic. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, he was really angry about the notion that somehow he would forget probably the worst thing that had ever happened to him in his life, and that was the death of his very young son, who had such promise and who he put so much faith in terms of his future in leading this country.
As Peter Alexander mentioned, the report made clear distinctions between a potential case against Biden and the pending case against Donald Trump. Her wrote that, unlike the evidence involving Mr. Biden, the allegations set forth in the indictment of Mr. Trump, if proven, would present serious aggravating facts. Her continues, quote, most notably, after being given multiple chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, Mr. Trump allegedly did the opposite. According to the indictment, he not only refused to return the documents for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it.
Well, Jill, thank God for small favors. We had special counsel who, instead of trying to be a neurologist who graduated from Trump University, actually laid out the facts and how they were so radically different in Joe Biden's case and Donald Trump's case. But the question is, will anybody notice today, given his extraneous remarks?
Good point. It was a report that should have led to a headline that said, no indictment, no facts support the evidence to indict him. And it has long been the policy of the Department of Justice not to indict unless there are aggravating facts. And Hur went so far beyond the lines and so deliberately, it was Comey redux. There's no question that what he said was improper. But I want to go a little further. Not only was what he said not relevant to a decision to indict or not indict, evidence is why you indict or don't indict. It is standard procedure to say we decline to indict because there's a lack of evidence. And then to put the knife in and twist it to create a political narrative also is Merrick Garland's fault, because he had the right to edit the document and to say, this has nothing to do with my decision. First of all, Biden will not testify, and so his credibility before a jury is not relevant. So if he's not going to testify, we don't need to look at that. We need to look at what the prosecution can prove on its own. And you've said there isn't evidence, and all of the things that we might have are easily refuted, and we cannot refute those claims. So I think it was really wrong on both people's part. Hur had a political motive to do it. I don't know why Merrick Garland let him do it.
It is really surprising the way this has been handled from the very beginning. Dave Ehrenberg, you're a prosecutor. Maybe you can explain to us, has something changed in the law for prosecutors over the past 5, 6, 7 years? It used to be you'd either indict or not indict. But what we saw with James Comey on July the 5th, 2016, was a guy who couldn't indict Hillary Clinton legally. So he held a press conference trashing, legally. So he held a press conference trashing her politically. So didn't indict her legally, but he did indict her politically. And now we have the same thing with her yesterday, who admitted, hey, this is not indictable. These are not indictable offenses. So he can't indict him legally. So he trashes him politically. Talk about crossing the lines. What was your take as an active prosecutor in what you read yesterday?
Joe, what I thought that this was such a political gift to candidate Donald Trump that he may have to list it as an in-kind campaign contribution. Robert Hur's appointment as special counsel is another example of Merrick Garland's determination to appear apolitical. Merrick Garland is a former judge, and the worst thing you can say about a judge is that the judge is biased or political, and that's why he kept on a Republican Trump-appointed U.S. attorney in David Weiss to investigate Hunter Biden. That's why he appointed a Republican Trump-appointed U.S. attorney in Robert Hur to investigate President Biden. And Jill's right. Merrick Garland could have edited this report. He didn't have to put all this extraneous stuff out there. How different is this than Bill Barr, who refused to show the public the Mueller report and then issued that 3-page memo that essentially doctored the report, that misinterpreted, misled the public? This whole thing should have been relatively easy. This was a similar investigation as with Mike Pence. There was full cooperation. There was no obstruction. The only reason the feds found out about these documents was that Joe Biden told them about it. Instead, Hur took over a year, then issued a 388-page report, including these gratuitous shots at President Biden. And, Joe, as you mentioned, it's a sloppy report. Summary on page 1 says that there was willful retention and disclosure, but then on page 215, it says there's a shortage of evidence on these points, right? Which is it? And, the question to me is, why did he do this? And I think the reason why he did this is that he was perhaps motivated to avoid David Weiss's fate. David Weiss is now hated by his own party, ridiculed as corrupt and incompetent by the MAGA world. Despite prosecuting Hunter Biden for 3 felony gun charges, 9 counts of tax offenses. So I think that's why Robert Hur did this. He is out Comey. It's Comey 2.0, and it doesn't look really good.